Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining me. My name is Kristen and I'd like to share with you my final thoughts for my March 2024 inked fountain pens. Some of these fountain pens were really good writers for the month of March, and others were a bit underwhelming. I'd like to share with you a little bit more about each pen and ink pairing, and then I will give you my final ratings for each one at the end of the video. I hope you enjoy. First up is the Esterbrook Estie Oversized Botanical Gardens with a journaler nib, and it was inked up with Ferris Wheel Press Hearty Harvest. Hearty Harvest was nice. It wasn't really a standout ink for me, but it was a pleasant color, and it performed beautifully in the journaler nib. I enjoyed using that nib so much that I bought a second Estie with the same grind. The unboxing video of my new Esterbrook Estie Mimosa is coming soon. Next up is the BENU Euphoria in Earl Grey with a fine nib. This one was inked up with KWZ Honey. This pen and ink pairing was quite nice. I really enjoyed being wrapped in the scent of vanilla whenever I used the pen. The paper actually still smells faintly of vanilla, but only if I put my nose on the paper and inhale deeply. I enjoyed the writing experience because of the fragrance of the ink and the feel of the sturdy, fine nib. I'm not blown away by the color of this ink in the Earl Grey pen, but that's probably because the ink wasn't a perfect visual match for the colors in the pen body. I wonder if this ink would impress me even more if I put it in a pen that wasn't brown. Here is the fountain telling Charleston Slim in the 3 Olive Martini finish with an extra fine nib. It was inked up with Diamine Safari. I love the super fine line that I get with this extra fine nib. Using this pen makes me feel like I have more than enough room in my Hobonichi and Sterling ink planners, and I love that feeling. I'm not as impressed with the ink, however. It performs flawlessly and matches the pen perfectly, but the color of the ink is underwhelming. I enjoy the color of other grungy green inks like Sailor Shikiori Tokiwamatsu more than this one. All right, here is the Aurora 88 Chatterley exclusive Birth of Turin with a medium nib. I have this pen inked up with Diamine Velvet Emerald. I remember this pen and ink combo feeling almost out of control when I first wrote with it during my initial thoughts video. I wasn't sure what to make of that experience until the ink flow regulated itself over time. I wish it was super wet again. This pen and ink combo wrote perfectly fine throughout the month, but I missed the glassy smooth feel and the deep dark green that brought with it a hint of sheen. I guess it's time to find a green equivalent to Diamine Writer's Blood. Next up is my Franklin-Christoph Model 3 in antique glass. It has a fine sig nib and it was inked up with Vinta Inks Karnival. I disliked the writing experience of this pen and ink combination at the beginning of the month, and I voiced some of my hesitations during the initial thoughts video. The nib felt scratchy at certain angles, and the ink felt dry, and it lacked lubrication, which made the sig nib feel sharper than usual. Over time, I became more accustomed to this feeling, and I realized that there's nothing wrong with this combo. I just prefer more lubricating inks with my stub and italic nibs. Here's my Kaweco Collection Sport fountain pen in Iridescent Pearl. It has a fine nib, and it was inked up with Pilot Iroshizuku Ku-jaku. This is one of my top 3 pen and ink pairings of the month, if not the best one. The ink color is a beautiful match for this iridescent pearl finish, and it flows so well from this pen. It's probably the best experience I have ever had with a Kaweco fountain pen. I like the contrast of this light colored pen with a darker ink, and I'd love to try a wet fuchsia or a deep magenta ink next time. Next up is my Esterbrook Estie in Lilac with an extra fine nib. This pen was inked up with Troublemaker Ink's Abalone. I had high hopes for this combination. I think I was expecting the same experience that I had with the Sailor 1911 Large with an extra fine nib. Unfortunately, it seems that Troublemaker Ink's Abalone is a drier ink than Tassia Sabi Midori, and while Sabi Midori showed dimension and shading, Abalone appeared like a flat, pale blue ink on most papers. It seems that Abalone would appreciate broader, juicier nibs, or even a Pilot Parallel in order to display its chroma shading tendencies. This is the Gutovschi Handmade fountain pen in Ebonite that I purchased on Etsy. It has a 1.1 stub nib, and it was inked up with Parker Quink Blue Black. I wrestled with this stub nib every time I picked up the pen. I don't know if it's the nib's fault or if it's my fault. The ink is definitely not at fault. As in my past experiences, it's been a very reliable ink. I hated the writing experience whenever I attempted slanted cursive, and my downstrokes were unreliable whenever I wrote in semi-print. I hated this experience. Yes, I hated this experience. I have a spare gold-plated steel nib that I would like to try on this pen in the future. But if I can't get it to work with a replacement nib, then I'm going to sell this pen. Here is my LAMY Studio Black with a long knife nib. This was inked up with Ferris wheel press Aurorealis. I really enjoyed this pen and ink pairing. The ink color was nice and Aurorealis performed well, but I really think that my positive experience was more of a testament to the super juicy long knife nib that I paired with this ink. The ink and pen balanced each other out, and so I had no issues with this combination. This is my Leonardo Officina Italiana Momento Zero Grande Pura in gray anthracite, with a medium nib, and it was inked up with Akkerman Hochfarbe Gijs. This ink has caused me to appreciate my Leonardo Pura. I don't remember the ink I used with this pen in the past, but it was a bad first impression. Akkerman Hochfarbe Gijs is juicy and moody, perfect for this dark gray pen with ruthenium trim. I did experience a hard start after leaving the pen unused for a week or two, but it's performed beautifully since restarting the ink flow with a small twist of the piston knob. Next up is the Pelikan M205 Moonstone with a medium nib. I've got this one inked up with Diamine Moonbeam. This was a perfect match, both in color and in name. I'm so glad that my Pelikan M205 has a medium nib because this ink seems to require a thicker, juicier nib for optimal performance. The pen and ink pairing felt a little dry at times, especially at the bottom of a page, but I never experienced hard starts. This is a dry combo that I might endure occasionally just to experience the pen and ink together. Last but not least is my TWSBI Eco in cerulean blue with a medium nib. It's inked up with Diamine Nightfall. This is such a juicy pen and ink combination and I love it. The ink lubricated the nib so well that writing always felt effortless with this pen. The ink color is such a deep dark blue that it always looks black in my writing. So even though I absolutely love the shimmer, I feel like this deep dark ink color is a little underwhelming when I go back to read my journal entries. Okay, so now I would like to rank these pen and ink pairings for the month of March. First up is the TWSBI Eco in cerulean blue with a medium nib, inked up with Diamine Nightfall. That writing experience was always perfect no matter what time I picked up the pen. I really loved the experience and I loved the shimmer in that ink. Second is the Kaweco Collection Sport in Iridescent Pearl with a fine nib, inked up with Pilot Iroshizuku Ku-jaku. That was such a smooth writer. I was shocked every time I used that pen, and I loved seeing that color come from the Iridescent Pearl fountain pen. Third is the LAMY Studio in black with a long knife nib, and I really think that this is probably third place just based on my experience with the long knife nib. Fourth is my Leonardo Pura with a medium nib, inked up with Akkerman Hochfarbe Gijs. It was a lovely, moody gray ink color, and I loved the look and feel of that pen. Next is the Aurora 88 Birth of Turin with a medium nib, inked up with Diamine Velvet Emerald. Even though Velvet Emerald is not one of my favorite ink colors, I absolutely loved the writing experience whenever I used that pen. After that one is the BENU Euphoria Earl Grey with a fine nib, inked up with KWZ Honey. That was just a wonderful sensorial experience. So the next one is the Fountain Telling Charleston Slim in 3 Olive Martini, inked up with Diamine Safari. It was a pleasant enough experience, but I just didn't enjoy having all of that ink on the section of the pen. Next up is the Vinta Inks Karnival in the Franklin-Christoph Model 3 Antique Glass. It was a very dry writing experience, but pretty reliable, and I always enjoy the look of Franklin-Christoph's SIG nibs. After that is the Pelikan M205 Moonstone, inked up with Diamine Moonbeam. I loved that pairing, but I just enjoyed writing experiences of other pens more than this one. Next is the Esterbrook Estie Oversized in Botanical Gardens with the journaler nib. Once again, I enjoy the journaler nib grind. But the Ferris wheel press Hearty Harvest was an underwhelming ink for me. After that is the Esterbrook Estie and Lilac with an extra fine nib inked up with Troublemaker Ink's Abalone. It was a pretty dry, underwhelming experience, and so I rarely ever enjoyed using that pen through the month of March. And last, and actually least, is the Gutovschi Ebonite fountain pen with a 1.1 stub nib. All right, so that is it for all of my currently inked pens and my final thoughts on each pairing. Let me know what you think. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope you have a great day. I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.